Now, here is Ticky Fullerton on Your Money.
Hello there, I'm Ticky Fullerton, every night bringing you a full hour of the very best in business coverage across the nation and internationally, especially where business and politics meet. Well, coming up, Bill Shorten's now the hot favourite for PM next year, so how should business read the upcoming Labour Party conference? We'll ask AI Group Chief Executive Innes Willox. And what sort of a year has it been for investment? And what are the politics and other events likely to bring for 2019 for investors? Well, Wilson Asset Management Chair Geoff Wilson joins me for more of that. And what a year it's been for the telco industry. We'll also catch up the news of the day, the ACCC's concern over the TPG-Vodafone merger, and get top analysis across the sector with Paul Budde. Now, British Prime Minister, the indefatigable Theresa May, has survived a vote of no confidence in her as a leader.
This has been a long and challenging day, but at the end of it, I'm pleased to have received the backing of my colleagues in tonight's ballot. Whilst I'm grateful for that support, a significant number of colleagues did cast a vote against me, and I've listened to what they said. Following this ballot, we now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country. A Brexit that delivers on the vote that people gave, that brings back control of our money, our borders and our laws, that protects jobs, security and the union, that brings the country back together rather than entrenching division. That must start here in Westminster.
Now, as with everything Brexit, the vote tally, 200 in favour and 117 against, is just one more polemic. As one BBC commentator put it this morning, this vote has been a chaotic detour. The car has gone off the road through a barn with lots of chickens flying out, but she's now back on the same road with the same cars chasing her. Nothing has changed, as Theresa May continually says, yet it has changed. 1/3 of the Tory parliamentary party has no faith in her. In more normal times, that would have meant resignation. And no surprise that the Brexiteer who pushed for the vote, Jacob Rees-Mogg, immediately called for her to trip off and see the Queen and throw in the towel. But she will not. Perhaps in part it is her determination, or rather stubbornness, to have the legacy of delivering Brexit. If anyone was in any doubt of the cruelty of the British tabloids, Thursday morning's warped depiction of the Prime Minister in the Daily Star, May, the Klingon Prime Minister, confirms it. But it's also the maths of the Parliament, which means she has no majority without the Northern Irish DUP. Now, the alternative is a Corbyn Labour government, so ironically, she can cling on. The confidence vote means that Theresa May cannot now be challenged for at least another 12 months. How many votes she won over by promising not to stand at the next election is unknown, and indeed whether she means that if another election were called in a few months is also unknown. What has changed is that the odds of a second referendum, I think, have now increased. Consider this. So Theresa May is weakened. She's off to Brussels to ask for more concessions, more than warm words around the backstop, the Irish backstop, whatever that means, a legal codicil, something. We've heard from Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker that there will be no renegotiation of the Irish backstop, no meaningful concessions. Could Mrs May then threaten her recalcitrant Brexiteers to fall in line or face an even softer deal, which might bring her support from across the floor from Labour? Well, most backbenchers believe she will lose the parliamentary vote that she postponed this week to the 21st of January. What will Mrs May do then? One obvious option for her is to try to put her deal to the country via a second referendum, with the question being, I might say, her deal or Remain. It would mean a no deal would be off the ballot paper. Now, if that happened, ironically, many folk who voted for Brexit might well vote Remain on the grounds that it is a better deal for Britain than her deal. And that's exactly what staunch Remainers like former Minister Anna Soubry have been hoping for. Yet the British Parliament may also have other ideas about the wording of a second referendum question, and you can bet the placard holders in London's winter streets will too. A no deal, in other words, crashing out of Europe and relying on WTO trading rules, is still a possibility, as is a call to delay the Brexit withdrawal date of the 29th of March. Business in Britain is as confused as the rest of us. The city is preparing for the downside scenario, not just of a no deal, that would be bad enough, but of a Corbyn high-spending, high-taxing, nationalising Labour government. Far worse. We wait for the next painful development when Mrs May returns from Brussels with a brightly wrapped Christmas present full of the proverbial. Well, let's head back here to Australia. Now, one of the most controversial political policies so far to emerge in this election campaign has been Labour's one to change franking credits. The backlash from the business community has been very strong. We've heard arguments against the policy from Solomon Lew, Emilio Gonzalez and the very vocal Geoff Wilson, who all claim that Labour's policy is an attack on self-funded retirees. Well, this week we've seen BlackRock's head of equities, Charlie Lanchester, come out not really against Labour's changes, saying it's no big issue and it won't impact ordinary investors. Now, despite this, Financial Review's Phil Curry says that policy still faces stiff opposition in the Senate, with the changes unlikely to pass before existing Senate term expires on June 30 next year. Well, for more on the issue and other controversial policies that have rocked markets this year, I'm pleased to welcome Geoff Wilson, himself Chairman of Wilson Asset Management, who joins me live at the desk. Geoff, you must have your right of reply against Charlie Lanchester first.
Thanks, Ticky. Well, if you speak to Charlie, if you get him on, I was texting him very early in the morning.
I bet you were.
After I read it, and I think, unfortunately, from Charlie's perspective, he's not in touch with the people who are going to get significantly impacted by this policy. Like, we've got 80,000 shareholders, 60,000 of them are self-managed super funds. You know, they are the sort of the middle and lower income earners, retirees that are trying to do the right thing and survive on a $45,000 a year, which is going to go to $32,000 a year.
So I guess this is where you draw the line, isn't it? Because Charlie Lanchester was saying targeting, he says in particular, some large wealthy clients that are able to claim huge tax credit from the system makes some sense, he says. Would you agree with that?
I'm 100% agree. The problem is there aren't that many there anymore, because I know, like, fortunately in life, I've done quite well from an investment perspective. I suppose you'd assume, isn't it?
Well, I'd hope so.
That's right. So my super fund is a very reasonable size, and the impact that has on me is zero. This policy, like it is an unfair policy. It's badly thought out. I mean, even if Labour does look to make some sort of carve out for the sort of less well set at the moment, and even if even if they grandfather, as they're saying, you still think there'll be this massive impact? Well, if they do, well, first of all, they've said if you're a pensioner before the 28th of March, then you get the franking back. So if you just happen to be born a month later and go on the pension after that date, you don't get it. Now, I mean, that is just bad policy. If they carve out a certain amount, then that. Let's look at how you apply that. The problem is
where you draw the line.
Well, where do you draw the line? And if that's, I mean, the conspiracy theories are saying they're trying to drive people out of the self-managed super funds, which Paul Keating put together, and I was talking to a gentleman who sat with Paul Keating and devised that system. And the reason Paul Keating did that, he wanted another pool of capital. Have
you spoken to him? Do you know what his position is on this?
No, I haven't. No, but I've spoken to someone who put the tax together with Keating. And he was telling me that in those days, his when he put together the franking and the self-managed super, to encourage another pool of capital that would support Australia and would be focused on income rather than capital, because in those days you paid no capital gains.
So what about, again, the argument that some have made, and Charlie Lanchester makes it again, that this is a very odd situation we've got ourselves into in Australia with these franking credits. Doesn't quite, this particular policy which Labour, is trying to reverse, doesn't actually exist elsewhere in the world.
To me, is that a bad thing? Everyone has different policies. Like, we haven't had a recession for 26 years.
Yes.
Is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a good thing.
But on the face of it, were our super system not sort of geared to having this thing in place? If we could start again, would we do it, really? Would we have this particular...
Well, I mean, to me, isn't this system incredibly fair? So the whole idea was to reduce double taxation. And isn't that what it does? I mean, the franking system, I think there's 5 countries around the world that have franking systems or similar. I know New Zealand's one, but that's done at the company level. Yeah. So you actually don't get the refund.
But this is, I was going to say, this is where you're getting credits for not very much. Yeah, go on.
But you actually don't get that situation in New Zealand because they actually... You're on a different rate.
So what are you doing with your... Because obviously this is impacting your LICs quite dramatically. Will you convert them into trust to try and get around this?
I mean, that's a simple process, that can be done.
Would you need to feel you need to do that if that's...
Well, first of all, Labor needs to win. And I know, the odds are Labor will win. And to me, this could be, I mean, if Shorten loses this election, he loses the unlosable election. But we saw that with Houston.
But equally, there are other things going on the corporate side of the market. I mean, there are a lot of big companies which are responsible for paying, the lion's share of dividends in this country, who are preempting this and who are looking at share buybacks and trying to solve the problem that way. Well,
or to pay out the franking now. Anyone who's got excess franking, and we saw that with BHP, and you'll get more excess franking paid out because they're worried. I mean, it was interesting.
But won't that solve the problem largely?
Well, only that just gets the backlog of franking that's in the system out into the shareholders' hands, which is where it should be. But in terms of going forward, it was very interesting. The article, as you said, Phil Coorey's article in front page of the Fin Review the other day, is it wouldn't get through the Senate, and. I mean, I know there'll be a slight change in the Senate at this next election, but it wouldn't surprise me if it gets blocked in the Senate. And then,
mind you, anything can happen. Anything can happen. I'm not making it. Now, interesting, though, that Macquarie Bank analysts have come out today, and they're actually all tipping that a number of sectors will suffer under Labor. Banks, property, builders, health insurance and energy. Do you agree with that?
100%. I mean, what concerns me... Well, first of all, just finishing off on franking credits, to me this very much reminds me of the mining tax. It was badly timed. I actually thought it wasn't a bad tax, the mining tax. It was just badly put together and badly timed. And the money that it said it would raise, the $5 billion plus a year, it never did. I think it raised $126 million in the first 6 months. And I think what they think they'll get from franking, everyone will change their behaviour. So the money they think they'll get, they won't. And then on the other side, you've got this spending.
But I think that's what Labor's looking to do, isn't it? They're looking to change people's behaviour. And if you take negative gearing in the property market, there's John Simon saying negative gearing could tip Australia into a recession. Now, Chris Bowen would say, well, that's incredibly irresponsible. We're actually looking to reform this sector.
Yes. The thing is, it's always how you do it, isn't it? With the franking situation, you've got people that have, for 17 years, have lived their life a certain way, and effectively overnight, they're going to say, look, how you live, we're going to reduce your income by 30%, which is grossly unfair. But in terms of the tipping Australia into a recession, my view is, if Labor win the election, things are slowing down anyway, and globally, I think that's what the markets are telling us.
Do you think that's bad enough? If Labor gets in, that in itself could deliver a recession. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's a high probability.
And that's because of negative gearing, franking credits, the impact on the energy sector with bringing in a national energy.
We're heading that. We're heading in that direction anyway. I mean, global markets are telling us, they've fallen. All the leading indicators in the US seem to be showing that things are slowing.
And what about the impact of the Royal Commission?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, I must ask you,
what did you think of Lindsay Maxted, in fact, Westpac's performance at the AGM yesterday, and the way that, I mean, it's been written up that really perhaps the board just don't get it. They don't get, they haven't got the message really about a first strike on a big bank remuneration report.
To me, I think a lot of boards don't understand that the shareholders own the company. And I actually think, in the early days, I was against the REM report. And now I'm a big believer in it.
In the strikes.
In the strikes. I think what it does, it actually gives shareholders a voice. And if you look at the list of who has had strikes, boards have to pay attention because they're only there because the shareholders want them there. It's not a directors' club. All right. So to me, they should get beaten over the head as much as they can.
I can sit and talk to you for hours, but I must ask you one thing. We're heading into the ALP conference this weekend. Now, the other thing that some are bringing to the table is the idea that for-profit funds, retail funds, should actually be banned based on what happened at the Royal Commission and the revelations about profit gouging. What do you make of that?
I think that is a bit extreme. I suppose regulation. I'm a believer in that don't over-regulate, and in theory you want entrepreneurs, you want small businesses, you want people.
And these big industry funds need competition.
100% they need competition. And effectively competition, enough competition should keep everyone honest, and that maybe is a problem with the four-pillar policy.
Yes. Yes. Well, exactly.
I mean, maybe we just don't have enough competition there, and some of the drivers are. Unfortunately, they're all monetary, but to me, it's I mean, to me, it's a wake up for a lot of companies this last little period.
Indeed. Well, we'll see what comes to the surface at the ALP conference. Geoff Wilson, thank you so much for taking me through it and your passionate views on franking credits. Very interesting to finally get you here. That's good. After the break, looking back at this year and the moves in the industrial relations and the super space with AI Group's Innes Willox next.
You're watching Ticky on Your Money. Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, the government has announced it will establish a National Integrity Commission following ongoing calls from Labor and the crossbench. The announcement overshadowing the long-awaited release of the Religious Freedoms Report. Well, for more, Sky News reporter Annalise Nielsen joins me live from Canberra. Annalise, take us through the National Integrity Commission move now, because they have been sort of pushed into this, haven't they, the government?
Well, they say no, but it's hard to see it any other way, considering this was a huge concerted push from Labor and the crossbench to have an integrity commission. And we've heard over the last year in particular a lot of criticism coming from the government about the concept. We've heard the Prime Minister Scott Morrison refer to it previously as a fringe issue. We've heard that they've said that it has the potential to be something abused by those in power to use against public servants that they disagree with. They've previously criticised the state level groups, saying that they do operate in a way that allows unfounded allegations to be publicised and in many cases then aren't prosecuted. And it's hard to see it from any other perspective as being something that the government has resisted. This is Christopher Pyne just earlier in November talking against the idea.
It's the easiest thing to do is call for another organisation, costing money, giving it extra powers. I don't think that's necessary at the national level, and it's just another way of Bill Shorten trying to distract people from the real issues that matter.
But Ticky, the government says that they're confident they've found a model that won't end up as a kangaroo court, as the Prime Minister put it, where he said it won't be used for nefarious purposes. He said that this is something they've been working on since January, so they've very strongly hit back at any kind of idea that they weren't always behind this idea.
I have no interest in establishing kangaroo courts that frankly have been used, sadly, too often for the pursuit of political, commercial or bureaucratic agendas in the public space. I think those exercises have sought to undermine public confidence, not improve it. They've not added, I think, to the integrity of public administration, and they've become playthings of the usual actors. That's not what we're about. We're about having a robust, resourced, real system that will protect the integrity of Commonwealth public administration.
Now, Annalise, we've also finally got a peek at what Philip Ruddock was actually recommending in the Religious Freedoms report release.
Well, this is what we thought would be the headline announcement today, but it certainly got overtaken by this new corruption watchdog. But we did get that full report, almost 200 pages worth of expertise and recommendations for the government about how to handle religious freedoms. Now, we did get a taste of it when it was leaked just in the lead up to the Wentworth by-election, and that sparked that absolute furore about protections for gay kids in religious schools and about whether their rights superseded the rights of schools to be teaching the tenets of their faith. And what we've seen today is no major resolution on that. The government said from this report there's 20 recommendations. They've enacted 15, or they've moved to enact them, but 5 of them are being referred to the Law Reform Council for further advice, and that does include that recommendation about the rights of gay children in religious schools. And so that's something that they're not going to get that final recommendation on until the end of next year, well after the federal election. The opposition certainly wasn't happy about that today.
No, I could believe that, because that's a full year away. All right. Now I gather you picked the straw which leaves you in the lockup for MyEFO on Monday. Is that right?
Yes, lucky us. We're waiting for all those special details ahead of this federal election, including maybe a taste of what the migration target will be, and of course that headline that the government's been dying to announce, which is the promised surplus.
Yeah, and the timing, as we were saying before, right in the middle of the ALP conference, is quite cute.
Now, they've been very much at pains to say that it was just a simple coincidence, but we know the Labor Party certainly wasn't happy. They've already had to move their conference once because the Super Saturday by-election was set on the Labor conference day. We had the federal government coming out very strongly at the time, Malcolm Turnbull saying it was absolute poppycock that was connected at all. He even reportedly made complaints to the ABC about reporting on that itself, but it's something the Labor Party certainly not let up about, and so there seemed to be quite miffed that it has coincided, but it's unlikely it's going to completely kill all of the headlines coming out of the Labor conference.
Well, I wonder who it'll be in favour of. Well, we'll find out after the Labor conference, and well, actually in the middle of it on Monday. Catch up with you then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ticky.
Annalise Nelson there. Right, 2018 saw the return of the industrial relations portfolio to the Prime Ministerial Cabinet, with Kelly O'Dwyer taking over the portfolio for the first time after being ditched in 2013 by the Abbott government, the portfolio I mean. This was welcomed by major industry groups, with key issues such as bargaining and now casual worker entitlements back on the table. Well, this year was also a massive year on energy policy, with the controversial NEG ultimately being dumped at the hands of Prime Minister Scott Morrison. We also saw the introduction of the big stick by Energy Minister Angus Taylor, which, after facing outrage from the business community, has been watered down and is now actually in limbo until April next year. Well, for a recap on all of this and other big policies to impact the Australian industry, I spoke with AI Group CEO Innes Willox a little earlier. We started out talking about the ALP conference happening in Adelaide over the weekend. Innes Willox, thanks for joining me. Now, the ALP conference front and centre is likely to be industrial relations. What do you make of Brendan O'Connor's comments at the Press Club this week that Labor will support the ACTU push for workers in some low-paid industries to be given the right to bargain across whole sectors?
Well, there's a couple of questions here, Ticky. We're not quite sure how it can work across sectors. That's one point. That benefits the economy as a whole and benefits individual workplaces. And secondly, we can't see how it can be stopped or constrained to just within the low-paid sector, the childcare sector, those sort of parts of the economy. You've already seen the Transport Workers Union come out and say that they want a similar deal across airlines. This will be opening the Pandora's box for other unions to push forward demands, and the pressure on the Labor Party, should it be elected, would be enormous. The fact is that we have an award system and it's underpinned our economic growth and our strength for the past 27 years. It's been very important to that growth and strength, and to undermine it would be very dangerous indeed. The second point is that unions under the Fair Work Act already have the right to push for wage claims across multiple work sites. They've tried it 3 times and been rejected 3 times because they haven't been able to sustain their claims, or because it's been obvious that workplaces have been able to be covered by enterprise bargaining agreements. So we think this is a retrograde step, a backward step, and it is quite dangerous for the economy as a whole if it was to proceed.
Well, Brendan O'Connor argues, remembering union membership has been reduced substantially, he argues that despite what the government says, there is no evidence that multi-employer bargaining actually leads to increased industrial disputation, let alone any forecast of economic doom.
Well, there's a difference here. What Brendan O'Connor is doing is comparing Australia with some European economies where they have a completely different industrial relations system. Look, the unions make that claim as well, but they can't have it both ways. They can't say that industrial disputation is at record lows under the enterprise bargaining agreement system either, and that's a positive thing. They can't have it both ways. Look, the point here, Ticky, is, look, we have sympathy and understanding around low-paid wage streams. We understand, you know, that there's strong arguments, for instance, that childcare workers should be paid more. That's an argument to be made. But let's work it out on an enterprise by enterprise level or in another way that doesn't cross the entire sector.
But is that going to deliver the outcomes that workers in, say, the childcare sector actually would want?
Well, you would hope so over time. But the issue here is that it has to be worked out in a way that isn't economically damaging to the economy as a whole, which this proposal has the potential to do. Because all you can see, if you look ahead, is that the unions across the board will start to put more pressure on a Labor government to extend this across the economy. And that is going to be reckless and dangerous for Australians and for jobs.
Innes, clearly front and centre at the conference will be low wages growth set against company profits that frankly have been pretty good.
Well, company profits have remained pretty level across the last 20 years, according to ABS data. The exception is in the mining sector. There's been no huge spike in company profits. Overall, the mining sector has gone up. So, you know, part of the claims that the union movement are making just don't stack up on evidence. You've got to remember the majority of Australian businesses are small businesses. They're not big businesses. They're not. The Australian economy is not made up by, you know, a dozen or so huge companies. There's hundreds of thousands of small companies, and they're the ones who would be impacted. Those who run small businesses aren't raking in huge profits, and we need to keep that in mind.
Another idea coming to the ALP conference, I think, is to ban retail funds or for-profit funds from operating after the revelations in the Royal Commission. What's your response to that?
Well, I have to disclose I sit on the board of Australian Super, which is an industry fund and a very successful one. But the Royal Commission has brought forth a litany of stories of poor behaviour by banks and by retail funds and some funds associated with banks, and I think it's going to be incumbent as the Royal Commission brings down its final report in February that the findings that are put forward around fixing up behaviour in retail funds are adhered to and are implemented as quickly as possible. The fact though is, Ticky, we need competition in that space and to try to wipe out non-industry funds with the stroke of a pen, that wouldn't be a good move either. There needs to be competition in the space for a whole range of obvious reasons.
Now, we've just seen Greg Combet made chair of Australian Super, where, as you say, you're on the board, and indeed chair of Industry Super Australia, which is really a research and policy unit for Industry Super, but also a lobby group for them. Now, should Australians be concerned by the extraordinary growth in power of both the funds under management of Industry Super combined with a former union fellow now chairing Industry Super Australia, where also on the board sits Sally McManus and the CFMEU's Michael O'Connor?
And there are also a range of employer representatives on the board of Industry Super Australia, and it was up until recently chaired by Peter Collins, the former Liberal leader in New South Wales. So that position sort of gets swapped around after every term between employer representatives and union representatives, and the Industry Super Australia is sort of the umbrella organisation for industry funds, and it does lobby on behalf of industry super, but I don't think there's anything to be concerned about in terms of its governance or anything like that. I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Right, well, Greg Combet, when I put this to him, said indeed, of course, he acknowledges being a former union leader, but his obligations are now to his members. We are going to get pressure, though, from the likes of Sally McManus and Michael O'Connor, though, to get industry funds to push corporate Australia to do things about wages, aren't we?
Well, you see that occasionally from union leaders, and you see immediate pushback from employer representatives such as myself. So the way the industry funds work is that if one side wants to push a political agenda, it's really going to get knocked on the head by the other side. So I saw Tony Sheldon from the TWU made similar claims just recently about a company that he was in dispute with, and quite frankly, we shut that down very quickly, and that's just not going to happen. And look, the claims could be made. There's all sorts of, power should be wielded in one way or the other. The good thing about how this system is set up, that it's not unfettered power for unions or employers, and there has to be a balance, and that will be maintained.
It's not a slippery slope, though, because obviously there is pressure on investing responsibly. There's pressure on social licence, what people invest in now. Under a Shorten-led Labor government, you'll have a lot of former union leaders in power. You don't see this as a slippery slope towards influence in corporate Australia to get union agendas through?
Well, I think, if you look at the possible makeup of a Shorten government, there are ex-union officials dotted across the Labor Party front and back benches. But I don't see it as a slippery slope to use vehicles like superannuation, for instance, to achieve political ends, because the system mitigates against that. Superannuation funds like the one I'm on, Australian Super, have very clear guidelines and responsibilities around ESG, environmental sustainability and governance protocols, and that's what we adhere to, and that's what we operate by, and they have to be agreed by the boards of those organisations, union representatives and employer representatives.
And back to the ALP conference, penalty rates are on the agenda again. Labor have vowed to restore penalty rates if elected.
Well, this would be a retrograde move for this reason, Ticky. It would completely diminish, if not obliterate, the independence of the Fair Work Commission. Now, Labor representatives say, oh, look, we can legislate or regulate around the work of the Fair Work Commission at any time. But the fact is that it has made a decision here based on evidence presented by both sides, unions and employers. It brought down a decision which it described as a modest cut to penalty rates. Because the penalty...
Yeah, you could say that was before Minister Kelly O'Dwyer made her appointments to the Fair Work Commission last week.
You could say that. So it was a decision made by the bench as it was constituted at the time, because it found that the penalty rates that were being asked to be paid by employers at that time were not representative or fair in a modern economy. Now, to go backwards, to sort of re-regulate in that way, basically diminishes the independence of the umpire, means that the umpire can only make decisions in one way, that is to increase wages and make changes that only benefit union claims. So what will happen in the end, Ticky, is that employers will see what happens, give up, walk away from the system, and we're back into chaos. So employers aren't going to tolerate that either when they've basically got no chance of winning. It's like being asked to run onto the field for the grand final knowing that you're just not going to win, you're not going to get a kick. So who's going to do that? Not employers.
It is very nice to get a footy reference in just before the end. Innes Willox, thank you very much indeed, and happy Christmas.
Great, thanks Ticky. Same to you. Have a good one.
And after the break, concerns flagged by the ACCC for the planned merger of TPG and Vodafone. We'll be talking about the mega merger and more with telco expert Paul Budde next.
This is Ticky on Your Money, covering the big business stories.
Yes, welcome back. Well, the ACCC has expressed preliminary competition concerns about the proposed merger between TPG Telecom and Vodafone. The Commission says removing TPG as a new independent competitor with its own network would be likely to result in substantial lessening of competition. Well, shares have fallen as much as 18% at the open following the statement. TPG agreed to the merger with Vodafone in a bid to ease competition in the cutthroat sector and buying scale to take on bigger rivals Telstra and Optus. Well, the planned merger combines the third and fourth largest telecom firms into a larger third player holding TPG's fibre network and Vodafone's mobile system. Vodafone says despite the concerns raised by the ACCC, it still remains confident the merger will be completed in the first half of 2019. Well, the merger was one of the biggest plays in the telco sector this year, and on that and other big telco stories in 2018, it's great to have Paul Budde, who joins me live in the studio. Paul, let me ask you about TPG first. I mean, this was the great deal that David Teo had masterminded. Do you agree that it will go through in some way, shape or form tomorrow?
Yeah, you know, I think if they could change it a little bit, like you get then a main system and a discount system, a little bit like Qantas and Jetstar, yeah?
So that's what Rod Sims at the ACCC is concerned about, is it?
Yes, it's the competition, and it's very clear, you know, when the announcement was made initially, Telstra's shares went up, indicating the market saw, less competition, you know, hip hip hooray for Telstra. And now, of course, shares are going down again, yeah, because of the fact that, oh my God, it might not go in the
So if you're separating it into the equivalent of Qantas and Jetstar, are you suggesting that one of those would not be owned by the new TPG Vodafone? Yeah,
you know, I think there could be a wholesale retail arrangement. There could be structural separation on the retail side. Yeah, you know, you could do. They can come up with clever sort of systems, you know, that perhaps would then satisfy the ACCC's concern about competition, because that's the major concern.
Okay, go on. Yeah.
The other side, of course, is, you know, that it is a cutthroat market, and we have already heard over the last couple of years rumours that Optus is for sale and Vodafone is for sale. So, you know, it's a tough time. So even if this merger is not going ahead, then we might still see in a couple of years' time a reduction of competition, because one or two of the players are going to change anyway.
And Paul, where are we going to end up on this situation with wholesale prices coming out of the NBN to the telcos? I mean, Andy Penn has again reiterated that it's NBN that's got to move.
That's true. It's interesting to actually look at that, Ticky, because, you know, if you go back 5 years ago, then everybody was complaining about the wholesale prices from Telstra, yeah? And Telstra kept them nice and high, yeah? Yes. And now, obviously, they're on the other side, and now they are complaining, you know, about the wholesale price. But he has a point, you know, that's absolutely true. He has a point. You know, we need to have affordable broadband.
But that can only be done if we go back to then writing down the NBN.
Yeah, that's one of the...
Do you think under Labour, if Labour came in, that would be considered?
Yes, I think, you know, of course, you know, just writing down, I mean, there are quite a lot of different financial scenarios that will lead to an outcome like that. So it won't be a straightforward write-down. It will be in particular areas, you know, in, for example, only the fibre to the node network or whatever. There could be different scenarios to make it not look that bad politically, but at the same time have the same results, that you lower the cost, on which you then can base your wholesale prices and then your retail prices, because in the end, customers are not going to pay more than $50, $60, $70 on average, for a broadband connection. So you have to facilitate that.
Okay, now the great 5G that's coming in, you've actually even suggested that there could be a bit of a conspiracy there. This is all everybody's. This is really about the operators creating this whole 5G thing as another way to just charge a bit more for something new.
The vendors, yes. So you know, the vendors, So yes, what I'm saying is that I haven't come across anybody who's complaining about their 4G service. It's a nice service. It's speedy. You know, nobody's complaining. So why on earth would we like 5G? Yeah. There's not much in it for now, but for the vendors, you know, of the equipment companies, of course, for them, wow, because it's billions and billions of dollars in Australia, you know, altogether hundreds of billions of dollars if you look at the whole world, you know, that these vendors then actually can get out of the operators. In the end, the operators are not going to much more. I'm not going to pay more for my 5G connection than for my 4G connection. And when they start talking about connected cars and e-health and whatever, listen, it's 5 or 10 years away, because the 5G network, you know, with what they call millimeter waves, that is going to take 5 to 10 years to deploy.
So how does that throw into Telstra's 2022 vision? Because 5G is crucial to it.
Yeah, you know, obviously it's interesting to see if they can pinch away a little bit on the bottom end of the NBN market. Yeah, at the moment 15% of the population in Australia is mobile only. Andy Penn thinks it could be 30%, and that would mean more people are using 5G for access to the mobile network. Possibility. I think 30% is a bit high. I would say 20-25%. So, you know, he starts looking at particular sort of areas, but you know, it is an uphill battle.
Finally, the other huge news was Huawei, of course, that has been cut out of the 5G market here. New Zealand, Britain has done a backflip. There's pressure, obviously, in Canada over the Huawei arrest. How do you see Huawei impacting the global game?
Now, two elements to it. I mean, you know, when we looked a couple of years ago, when America, the PRISM with Edward Snowden, you know, when that happened, it's clear you don't have to be China. You can be America to infiltrate in any network anywhere in the world that you want. The Australian security service went into the mobile phones of the president of Indonesia. Yeah. So, you know, I mean, you don't need Chinese equipment for that to happen. On the other side, it's true that China, in China itself, has a policy that its citizens and its businesses, its allegiance should be to China.
Yeah, and it can influence if it wants to. And that can
absolutely, you know, that's a serious issue. So I truly believe that China will have to step up their policies in order to be as transparent, that they are the right institutions, you know, to monitor what's happening there, like we have in the West. Yeah, that is what China needs to do if it wants to be a global player in this market. Otherwise, I think China will have a real problem going forward, with its products and services in this complex market that we nowadays have.
It sure is. Paul Budde, racing around the world with you. Thank you very much, and happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Ticky.
OK, after the break, UK Prime Minister Theresa May will see another day in Parliament after winning a vote of confidence overnight. We'll get the latest with the CEO of the Australian British Chamber of Commerce, David McCredie.
Now, back to Ticky.
Welcome back. Well, newsflash, Theresa May will remain British Prime Minister after surviving a confidence vote with 200 MPs support. 117 voted against her in the high-stakes ballot, which was triggered amid anger over her Brexit deal. Prior to the vote, Theresa May told MPs she will not be standing at the next general election. She's also now protected from another confidence vote for a year.
The result of the ballot held this evening is that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence. Does have confidence in Theresa May as leader of the Conservative Party. The number of votes cast in favour of having confidence in Theresa May was 200 and against was 117. Under the rules set out in the constitution of the Conservative Party, no further confidence vote can take place for at least 12 months.
Well, now, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn released a statement saying the vote makes no difference to the lives of our people. He says the Prime Minister has lost her majority in Parliament, her government is in chaos, and she's unable to deliver a Brexit deal that works for the country. So where to from here? Well, for more analysis, it's great to have David McCredie, Chief Executive of the Australian-British Chamber of Commerce, who's been joining me all this week. And now, this development, was it a surprise, do we think?
Look, I think it had been brewing for a while. Jacob Rees-Mogg, obviously, a number of weeks ago had sort of tried to light the fire under people, but had sort of stalled in the early 30s. But clearly the
they got the 48 letters.
Yeah, but obviously the events of Monday, Tuesday this week, without the vote going ahead, spurred others to write. But I think probably politically it was a bit naive. It's one thing to get 48 letters. It's another thing to get the 159 votes they needed to
Well, Jacob
topple
Rees-Mogg afterwards straight away was saying, right, well, that's enough for Theresa May to really resign, go off and see the Queen. But actually, not at all. She is not going anywhere. Nevertheless, 117 votes. That's a third of her parliamentary party. Isn't that a bit of a problem?
Well, I mean, we've seen the problem of internal party politics in this country quite a few times over the last few years. So I don't think it's necessarily a huge problem.
OK, so the other side of things is she's off to Brussels.
She is.
Yes. Now, she's got to come back with something, David, hasn't she?
Well, she does, absolutely.
And what are the chances? Something acceptable to the British Parliament to vote at her delayed vote on January 21?
Well, I think it probably comes back to what we've discussed many times, actually, which is at the end of the day, the European Union, the way it works is it tends to be when the rubber's really hitting the road in the last moments before midnight. That's when deals get done. So, we thought that actually they'd done quite well to get to a cabinet and then an EU27 tick for the deal. Yes. It's clearly been repudiated by, she clearly didn't have the numbers, hence why the delay in the vote. Yeah. So she can go back with a pretty strong hand, actually, that, well, you're leaving us no option, and it's not good for you either. So how about we talk about how that might pan out? But
equally, EU leaders, yesterday, the day before, have made it very, very clear that they ain't going to be moving. I mean, they would have to climb down a lot if they start delivering some sort of legal change to the Irish backstop.
Yeah, that's true, but the question, and it goes back to the fundamentals of what is this and where are we going, and this is the withdrawal bill. Yes. And I think we talked about the other day the fact that whilst this is the withdrawal bill, the future agreement is all to play for, and the Irish backstop is actually irrelevant if they come up with an arrangement that allows frictionless open borders between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Yeah.
One wonders why she didn't accept that deal from Europe back in March.
Well, there are reasons, I'm sure, and I'm sure there'll be many a book written about this this little episode in the future, which may have some insiders' knowledge that I certainly don't have on why that wasn't taken when proffered earlier. Yes. But I think we are where we are, and we have to move on from here. Her best chance is to try and take forward some changes to the EU27 leaders to make her case. And I think probably unlike the previous times that UK leaders have turned up in recent times, be that David Cameron before the first referendum or be that her in more recent times, actually she has a hard stop behind her. Yeah. And the UK has actually probably got more power in that negotiation at this point in time, potentially, than what they had previously. Because
look, that's a good point. But if she does come back with nothing or nothing acceptable to the British Parliament, the chances of even a referendum, people say, has increased slightly. Yeah, second referendum.
I think so. I mean, when we were speaking only a few weeks ago, it seemed that a second referendum was absolutely not on the agenda. That was obviously prior to the deal being made public. Since then, it's slowly built and built. Do I think that, given that currently she enjoys the support of her party, even if in a somewhat fractured way, in the House, there's no way that they won't support her and would support a no confidence motion and allow the idea of a Corbyn government. That's toxic, obviously, for Conservatives as a concept. So I think she'll survive in terms of the parliamentary setting. How this plays out in terms of what options actually are on the table, it really
But you could argue that the Europeans sitting there, who obviously don't want Britain to leave at all, could actually say, well, we're not going to give Theresa May anything. So it actually forces her to go back to the people to get a Remain vote, and then we're all back to square one, which is where we'd like to be.
Well, would you?
I'm saying if you're the Europeans.
Perhaps that's how the Europeans would like to see it. I'm not sure that that's necessarily taken as a given, as an outcome. And part of that is, obviously, the Remainers are very keen for that, but the Brexiteers, this deal is better than potentially remaining. Although it's interesting, there are some who are now saying, well, this deal is not as good as remaining. So, you know, no deal is better than a bad deal. Maybe is not quite so true anymore. Correct.
All right, David McCredie, brilliant to get your views. Thanks very much.
Pleasure, Ticky.
Well, that's all for the show tonight. Tomorrow night, the Chief Executive of Australian Rail Track Corporation having turned the first sod. John Fullerton, see you tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. or tonight on Catch Up at 10 p.m. Thanks for your company.